Matthew chapter 5 is where we'll read today. Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll read in just a moment in verse 33. Now, for the first slide for today, Jen, it's a proverb, I think. It's from Proverbs 10. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there for a moment. This puts me in a little bit of a predicament, doesn't it? What am I supposed to do with that? This is me trying to be wise, restraining my lips. This is wisdom, isn't it? Scripture again and again tells us that there is a great wisdom in considering carefully your words and the impact they might have before you speak them. And today we're talking about simplicity of speech. And you say, well, Collin, you're about to speak a lot of words. Is that wise? Well, only to the extent that I have carefully considered them. But even so, let's wade into today's topic with some fear and trembling, shall we? What does simplicity have to do with speech? Perhaps when you think about simplicity, you think more about simplifying stuff or busy schedules. And yet Scripture seems to indicate that we don't just have clutter in our closets and clutter on our calendars, but also some clutter in our conversation. There's a cacophony of commentary, a congestion in our chatter. It is crammed with too many consonants, like this sentence. Let's not be careless with our communication, because as I've shown, it's so easy to unnecessarily multiply words, isn't it? Ephesians 4:29, one of my favorite scripture verses, is, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful, not hurtful, for building others up, for building them up, not tearing them down, according to their needs, not your desires, my desires, that it may benefit those who listen, or as the King James says, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. James says, similarly, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Be slow to speak. It's wise to pause. It's wise to think. Because once you speak a word, it can't be undone. You can't take back words. So much hurt and pain in this world could have been avoided if at some crucial moment the speaker of a careless word, a hateful word, would have just paused and simply said nothing at all. Because often our worst wounds are from words. Well, Collin, I tell you what I do. I just don't think before I speak. I just say the first thing that pops into my head, and that always works out for me. Said no one ever. But even though we know the damage that we can do with our words, and even though we think it's wise, and we know it's wise to pause and think before we speak, why haven't we been able to tame the tongue? Because it's not just a matter of the tongue, but of the heart. Jesus tells us that it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. That a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil out of the evil stored up in his heart, which means that your words bring out what's in your heart. It's like your words are the point where your inner life meets up with your outer life, where what's inside kind of spills out over to the outside. And sure, your inner life can remain hidden for a while behind a filter. You can filter your words so that they don't really show what's in you, but at some point, When anger crops up quick enough in your heart, it takes control of your mouth and bypasses that filter, and you say something you didn't intend to say, and you say, I didn't mean it, except it was in you. It just came out before the filter could catch it. And it does just as much damage. And I'm not saying that filtering your words is always bad. Just depends on what kind of filter it is. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. He says, again, you've heard that it was said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you've made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Now, can you imagine a world where all our conversation was so genuine and so truthful and so dependable that you never had to wonder whether someone was concealing something? That you never had to wonder if someone was really going to follow through with what they said, whether they were a salesperson or a businessman or woman or a politician. You could take their yes or you could take their no or whatever they said as absolutely believable without seeking any further reassurance. Or just saying yes and letting it stand without needing to convince or provide further evidence, because such was the trustworthiness of your word. Can you imagine if every compliment was offered from true simplicity, not given out of flattery or a desire to manipulate or to get anything from someone? Or if every time someone said, I'm fine, they really meant it, or else they wouldn't say it. That is simplicity of speech. To speak what's true and trust God with the rest. To speak what you intend without any cross purposes or competing agendas. To speak the truth in love. It's the opposite of duplicity, where words mask what is true or are spoken to mislead. Jesus rejects the kind of duplicity that he saw in the Jewish religious leaders who said, well, the Old Testament says that I have to fulfill any oath that invokes the name of God. So if I don't swear by the name of God, then does that mean I don't have to keep my vow? You see the loophole that Jesus is attacking? Because the law demands that a person remain true when they swear by the name of God. So it's not really breaking the law if I swear by the holy city, Jerusalem, and then don't fulfill my vow. As long as I don't swear by God's name, that's what the law says. It says I have to fulfill that vow. I could vow anything impressive sounding without obligation, as long as I didn't swear by God's name. The oath became something that helped mask the true intent of the heart. That is duplicity. They were serving two masters. I can appear honest and sincere while also manipulating with an empty promise. But there's also something else here. It seems to me that there's a great deal of humility involved in simply letting your word stand as it is. To let your yes be yes, and anything beyond that, Jesus says, is from the evil one. Which means you're not trying to convince or coerce or manipulate with words beyond that. The religious leaders probably sounded very impressive. They probably sounded very religious when they swore by the temple and by the holy city, Jerusalem. But simply letting yes mean yes and not feeling the need to multiply oaths, that is not only honest, but it is clear and humble speech. The more I thought about simplicity when it comes to my own words this week, the more the Lord brought me back to the idea of humility. And I want to suggest that if we're going to speak more like Jesus spoke, it will look like humility. After all, isn't that what Paul is getting at when he says, Speak only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may give grace to those who hear. The focus is totally other-centered in that verse. Their needs, building others up, that it may give grace to the ones who hear. That is a humble way to speak, an other-centered way to speak. Which leads me to think that perhaps our speech is one of the absolute best places to make real spiritual progress in the area of humility. Just think about Jesus. Jesus seemed to have an amazing ability to always speak a word that was fitting for every situation he was in and every person he was with, to rebuke the religious leaders when it was needed, to speak gently to the woman caught in adultery, to ask probing questions of the woman at the well, and to respond brilliantly when questioned about paying taxes. He blessed when it was time to bless. He spoke wisdom for those who were eager to learn. But all of that was combined with the incredible humility to meet people precisely where they were at. Can you imagine the kinds of things, how many things Jesus knew? Can you imagine the insight and the wisdom that Jesus had that he never shared with anyone? At the end of the story of the gospel, or at the end of the Gospel of Luke, there's this story about Jesus walking with two disciples to Emmaus. And Jesus is walking with them, and it says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And what's so amazing about that is not just that Jesus understood how all the scriptures related to him, and wouldn't you love to be there to hear that, but that up until that point, Jesus hadn't revealed all of that knowledge because it wasn't time yet. Jesus was constantly restraining himself to meet people with where they were at, with what they could understand at that moment, because his goal was not to show how much he knew. As we practice simplicity of speech this week, I want to give you a few challenges that will season our speech with more humility. And the first one is this: refrain from offering your knowledge until asked for it. Try that for a week. I really enjoyed school growing up. I liked the classroom because I wanted to show what I know. I liked tests even because I wanted to show what I know. And maybe that's not bad, but in conversations, in my everyday talking, guess what? I wanted to show what I know. Now, if someone asks you a question, maybe answering, with what you know is not necessarily a bad thing. But if somebody else is like telling a story and you stop them to correct them on some inaccuracy because they got something wrong, that's not a good habit to have. Spouses are helpful in these situations, aren't they? After I'd been married to Candace a while, she told me, you never say, I don't know. This was like a couple of years. This was a couple of years into our marriage. She was like, I don't think I've ever heard you say, I don't know. She was right. I never admitted when I didn't know something. That's a problem. When someone tells you something and you say, yeah, I know, like you already knew, even though you didn't know, that's a problem. That's image management. It's duplicitous. It's misleading. So maybe this week, try not sharing what you know unless you are asked. Sometimes that's hard. It's hard to withhold your opinion on something when you have some great wealth of knowledge to share. Others might be giving their opinion about something that you know much more about. Refrain from offering what you think until you're asked. Seek for others to be heard before yourself. Of course, if someone is seeking your advice or asks your opinion, you might even be in the business where somebody comes and needs your expertise on something. Share freely what you think is helpful to them, but don't use that as an opportunity to show how much you know. If you struggle with this like I do, it might be helpful just to practice admitting when you don't know something. This is one way to just strike a blow to your pride, which says, I want to be noticed. I want to be impressive. You can say, nope, not today. But not only that, it will simplify things, I think, by preventing much unnecessary sharing of knowledge that, to be honest, people don't really care about, do they? They don't care about how much you know until what? They know how much you care. There's some truth in that. That's the more humble way to speak, isn't it? And it's like Jesus. Jesus probably never shared all that he knew. He knew so much more. The next way we can speak with humility, like Jesus, is to find the balance between speech and silence. Jesus did this well. Jesus was silent before the high priest when silence was needed. Proverbs says, he who restrains his lips is wise. Sometimes a word is needed and sometimes restraint is needed. And each person is going to need to find this balance. Simplicity of speech doesn't mean that we will all take on the same kind of personality or, all be outgoing or all be quiet and all be loud or all be shy. It doesn't mean we'll all take on the same kind of personality. No, it's not that. We won't all have the same personality, but humility requires that we become aware of how much we use words and how much we listen. It is prideful and self-indulgent to always dominate conversation without ever listening. That doesn't mean we should always be silent. There's some very good ancient wisdom here from the desert fathers and mothers who thought way more about this than we have and who practiced silence way more than we could ever hope to. Someone asked an old monk once, is it better to speak or be silent? And the old monk said, the man who speaks for God's sake does well. The man who is silent for God's sake also does well. Both are needed to honor God. So on the one hand, be aware that when you talk, that keeps others from talking and sharing. That keeps you from listening, and make an effort not to dominate conversation. Create space for other people to speak. Learn to ask a well-timed question and then listen. This kind of humility will honor God, and Jesus was good at this, at asking questions. And then on the other hand, if you're in this situation where you fear speaking up because of what others will think, well, then remaining quiet is not a virtue. Silence is often needed, but silence can sometimes be your fear of sharing something that would benefit other people, but you're afraid maybe of what other people might think. But you need to be sensitive to share, even if maybe you're afraid, and not try to manage other people's opinions. Sometimes silence can be passive-aggressive if you're punishing people by not talking. So there's a right proportion to all these things. And the ancient fathers and mothers said this, a man may seem to be silent, but if he condemns others in his heart, he is babbling ceaselessly. Isn't that good? What they're saying is that the goal is not just to stifle or filter our words. That's not the goal. Silence in itself is not a virtue. Underneath might be a heart of anger or fear. So be sensitive to where God might be leading you. Probably he's leading most of us to speak less and a few of us to speak more, and leading all of us to listen with more humility. So find that balance between speech and silence. The next thing is this: stop interrupting people. Humility requires that we do this. Paul tells us to, in humility, value others above ourselves. What if we valued other people's words as more important than our own? Stop interrupting people. And also, along the same lines this week, try not to have the last word every single time. Try not to add something else to what someone else has said. Just let it be. This is one way to love each other better and to model the humility of Jesus. It's going to be hard, but it is a more humble way to speak. Next thing to practice, be completely honest. Try this. This is harder than you think. You think, oh, I'm an honest person. Well, examine carefully what you say this week. Do you tend to exaggerate? If there were 70 people at your event and you say we had almost 100 people, well, that's misleading. If your boss asks if you did something and you were about to do it, don't say, yeah, I did it, and then go do it very quickly. Just say, no, I haven't done that yet. I'd be happy to get on that right now. Do you tend to skip over information that puts you in a bad light? Do you tell people that you're praying for them, but you aren't? What would it look like to be completely honest? You might be surprised at the places you're tempted to not be completely honest because we fear what other people think, or because we want people to think that we're better or smarter or more responsible than we actually are. Be honest. And then trust God with other people's opinions of you. Someone once said, other people's opinions of me is none of my business. Trust God with that. Another area that we can practice simplicity of speech is this. Don't seek to control through words. Words are often a means of control for us, aren't they? Pay attention to the ways you use words to manipulate or control, to try to coerce someone or to make someone do something. You know, Jesus knew the right thing for everybody to do. Can you imagine walking around and be like, I know what you should do, I know what you should do, I know what you should do? Can you imagine having that kind of knowledge, okay? And yet Jesus did not walk around trying to manipulate or coerce people to get them to do things. He made invitations. Think about the way you use words. Are you flattering someone because you want something from them? Are you assigning fault or blame or trying to make someone feel guilty because you want them to do something? Catch yourself and pause. Are you trying to exert control? Consider if it's okay to leave someone be and not seek to change them. Or consider what it is that you want from that person. Can you simply make a request for what you want? Or make an invitation like Jesus. When you find yourself trying to convince someone of the need for something, can you just ask for help? When you're about to say, it sure would be nice if someone would do such and such, consider simply making the request. Maybe that feels harder to ask for help, but it's also humbler. You know, sometimes it feels like half my conversations are me trying to figure out what the other person is really asking me to do. And simplicity invites us to ask for what we want and then simply let the request be what it is, a humble request, not an attempt to coerce or control. Now, it could be at this point that you're beginning to see why it is the proverb says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. Because this is tough for us. One of the desert fathers, Epiphanius, said this: the unrighteous sin with their whole bodies. The righteous sin through their mouths. He had a point, because it seems like the very last and hardest thing to tame is the tongue. We can have everything else mastered. We've got it all, we've got everything else in line, and yet the hardest thing to tame is this right here. And the goal is to bring your words this week under the same umbrella of simplicity as everything else, making your life about one thing: obedience to Jesus in everything. Even in the way that we speak every day, the goal is to invite God into that conversation, invite God to interrupt you, show you your motives, and begin that inward conversation with God about your words. Even if you had a perfect filter, listen to this, even if you had a perfect filter, and you could filter out every hurtful word, and all of your words were polite and nice, but you failed to align your heart with Jesus' heart, you will have missed it. Because Jesus doesn't invite us to just filter everything so that we're nice. He desires that we speak the truth in love, that we use words to love, to bless, to bring life, to impart wisdom. There is a higher vision for how we speak than just niceness. And what if this week you stopped yourself just a few times each day, maybe 3 times each day, make it your goal, once in the morning, once around midday, once in the evening, to stop yourself before speaking and you think, is this word spoken from humility? Am I trying to be interesting rather than being interested in the other person? Am I trying to make this conversation about me? Does humility require me to be silent and listen here? Have I been too eager to show what I know? Have I been completely honest? Have I interrupted anyone? Am I trying to control or manipulate with my words? If I want something, can I humbly request it? Can I speak fewer words, but with greater love? We have to consider the possibility that God did not give us words solely for the purpose of expressing ourselves. Probably mostly, he gave us words for the purpose of expressing his love through us. Jesus is our teacher here, and what we're seeking is to speak like Jesus would speak if he were me on my street with my neighbors, in my family, and had my personality and my Oklahoma accent. How would Jesus speak if he were me in this situation with my people and location? So that then maybe at least some of the time, people might hear more of Jesus than of me. Let's pray.